Hey everyone, Madam Ancestry here. I just wanted to take a few minutes and follow up with you from the last blog post getting started. I told you before that there are numerous resources within your own home that can help you begin your family history research, so I just wanted to take a few minutes and tell you how this information can be helpful to you. I decided to break section 2 into two parts because I didn't want the video to go so long. So for this segment, 2.1, we're going to go over photographs, programs, birth records and death records, cemetery and burial records, and obituaries. Now, this may shock some of you younger ones, but once upon a time, photos were actually printed on photo paper and not electronically uploaded to social media. Now, don't get me wrong, while I do enjoy being able to share photos with family and friends at the click of a button, there's nothing like being able to hold an actual piece of your family's history in your hands. So if you find that you have your photos all in electronic format, I seriously urge you to go and get them printed so that they can be properly documented for record keeping purposes. Now, several things you want to make sure are noted on the back of the photo. The first being the date. You always want to make sure you list the date out. So if it was December 12th, 1955, you want to make sure you list that out. If you don't know the exact date, but you know the month and the year, or maybe just the year, go ahead and list that information just so that there is a starting point of reference. Also, you want to list the full names of everyone listed in the photo, including their ages. And you want to list this information in the order that they are shown in the photo. So we know that when we look at a photo, we look at it from left to right. So you want to make sure you list those individuals in the same order as they're shown. Also, if they go by nicknames, list the nickname in quotes. So if you have a relative by the name of John Doe and you know that you all call him Skip or Junior or whatever the nickname is, you want to list him as John. In quotes, put the nickname, last name, Doe. Also, you want to list where the photo was taken and why the photo was taken there. So it could be Mom and Pop's Diner, Birmingham, Alabama, Judy's 25th birthday celebration, or family reunion dinner at Mom and Pop's Diner. This is helpful when people are gathering information and you want to know, well, where were they at when this took place? And so that information can be recorded. Also, it's a good practice to note who actually took the photograph. Whether it was a family member or a friend or a professional photographer, it's good to list this information out because there may be a good chance that this individual could have more photos of your relatives in their archives. I'm not saying it's 100%, but it is worth a shot, so it's a good practice to go ahead and note that on there. Also, you want to note if your photo is an original copy. If not, do we know where the original copies are kept or where the negatives are kept, so that way we can get more reproduced if necessary. If you are the one in possession of the original photo, you want to safeguard that thing with your life. Never, ever, ever loan out original copies to anyone because you don't want them to get lost or damaged. So make sure you keep up with that. If anybody wants it, you can always make them a copy of your original photograph. As far as programs are concerned, when I say programs, I'm referencing programs from different events like maybe a graduation ceremony or a wedding or any type of event. I love investigating programs when I go to events because the first thing I like to do is look at the program to see if there's anyone on there who has the same surname as I do, because then I need to find out who you are, who you're related to, and how are you related to me. The next thing I like to look for are common names or surnames of individuals that I know because I would like to find out what is our mutual interest at being at this event together. So programs can give you a good idea of what your ancestors were into, the types of people and groups that they were also affiliated with. As far as birth and death records, I don't think I really have to say that people will misrepresent the truth. Sometimes it's unintentional and it could be a simple mistake as in misspelling somebody's name. Other times it can be intentional where people just choose to omit certain information or they choose to provide knowingly provide wrong information. So you want to get these documents and you want to make sure they match up to the information you have been told. Does the person carry the same name that they were born with? Were they born in the town that they said they were born in? Are the parents' names correct? Were they born in a hospital? Were they born at home? If you are an immediate family member, you shouldn't have any issue obtaining a copy of a birth or death record. If you're not an immediate relative, there are privacy laws in place, and a certain amount of time has to pass before the information becomes public, and you can get a copy of this information if you're not an immediate relative. So, on the death records in particular, the information that I like to look for, I like to look at the cause of death, who the informant was, what funeral home handled the deceased, and where the deceased was ultimately buried. The reason I like to check out the cause of death is because, number one, I like to compare it to other death certificates for other ancestors to see, is this something that runs in the family? If it's cancer or a heart attack, okay, is this something that runs in the family? If it's a homicide, what were the circumstances surrounding this murder? Clearly there's a bigger story involved here. So that's something that I always like to check out. I also like to find out who the informant was. The informant is the person who provides information on the deceased, the birth, death, the parents, all that information, where they lived at the time of death, all of that information. In a lot of cases, the informant is a family member. Sometimes it is not. So it's good to find out who the informant was, because if you may run into a brick wall with researching information to this point on this ancestor, you may be able to make a connection with the informant or someone connected to the informant to be able to get additional information on the circumstances. The funeral homes can also be helpful because they can provide you with some information. It just depends on who you're talking to. Sometimes they will give information, sometimes they won't. It's all about privacy, and I totally get that and respect that. But the worst they can tell you is no. So I say go ahead and ask the question. I had a situation where I was researching this particular ancestor and I kept getting stuck and I couldn't figure out anything else. And I contacted the funeral home and they didn't really want to give me any information at first. And I explained, I'm strictly doing this for family history research. All I need to know is what happened after X point. Well, it turns out the individual was in the military. So he got his benefits and the military wound up paying for his funeral and all of this stuff. So that led me into a completely different direction to be able to research, because there was nothing on there that indicated that he was a veteran. So now I had another point of reference to follow to be able to get additional information on him. And I would never have known had I not contacted that funeral home to see what type of information they provided me on him. Also, as far as cemeteries are concerned, if you are able to find out what cemetery your ancestor is buried in, typically family members are all buried in the same area, same section. So if you find one, there's a good chance that you're going to find many more nearby. And if you check out the cemetery and burial records, sometimes the tombstones will also have inscriptions on them to be able to provide you additional information. You can find out things to, like I said, if they were a veteran, or I actually had a situation where there was a different ancestor that I was tracing, and I was able to find information in the census, but I couldn't find any death information. And I wound up checking out another website, and it turned out that the reason I couldn't locate her was because her name, as it was spelled on the tombstone, was spelled differently than it had been provided on the census document. But the reason I was able to tie it together is because on the inscription on her tombstone, it listed her name and it listed her as the wife of, and it listed her husband's name. So I go back and pull my records out, and he was the same person listed as her spouse on the census document. So that's how I was able to tie that together. So that can also provide some more in-depth information for you, or help you kind of tighten it up a little bit. As far as obituaries are concerned, obituaries can be considered as a short story of a person's life. Some people's stories are going to be shorter, some people's stories are going to be longer. It just really all depends on the type of life that this person lived. But they can give you a lot of information as far as your ancestor, as far as schooling, what they liked, what kind of hobbies they had, what kind of jobs they had, what kind of affiliations they had, and it will also list surviving relatives in the obituary, which is another good point of reference to check out. There were a couple of situations in my family, one on my father's side and one on my mother's side. And I promise you, you'll have this information and it may not mean anything at that point in time to you, or the next time you go back and look at it, you'll find something that you didn't see before. Some people get this information and they toss it out. Don't do that, because while it may not seem relevant to you today in this moment, I guarantee you're going to have the need for using that piece of information somewhere down the line to tie all of this together. Getting back to my other point, my father had given me some information, and I've gone over to his home and gotten photos and programs and obituaries, and I sit down and I sort through all this information, and I had a copy of his uncle's obituary. So, I had it all packed away in my little book with all my family information. And for some reason, this particular day, I decided to take the information out and look at it again. So I'm going through it and I'm reading through it. And I'm looking at the surviving family members. Okay, his wife and children and grandchildren and yada, yada, yada. I look over on the other side of the obituary to actually read through the program, which I don't know why I had never done that before. Maybe I just did and didn't remember. Well, I'm going through this obituary and I'll notice that this person is listed as reading the obituary during the service, and she has the exact same last name as all of us and everybody listed over here. So I said, So I go back and I look again. Her name's not listed over there. So I take the program back to my dad and I said, hey, who is this person? He had no idea who she was. He said he had never seen it before. So that's yet another cold case left to be solved, because now this individual is listed as part of the program. I mean, clearly they knew her to some extent. Who she was, we don't know. That's something still left to be discovered. My mom's family, she had a brother who passed away, and I was little, so I remember overhearing a lot of these stories after the fact. But there was a person who was listed in the obituary as another sibling, and this was how they all found out. Nobody knew this person. They had never heard of her before, so now everybody's scrambling around trying to find out who this person is and where did she come from. Thankfully, I had another family member who was able to make contact with her before she passed away, the relative in question, before she passed away. So she had questions and whatnot, and I think that that meeting did provide some type of closure. But the circumstances were, she was born and she was given away, I guess, at some point, but nobody knew about it. And then all of a sudden she popped up being listed as a sibling. So I want to also let you all know that lots of decisions that you make, you think that they're individual decisions, but every decision you make impacts a family unit. At some point in time, it impacts a family unit. So even if you make decisions that you may not be most proud of, or, document it somewhere that somebody has it and can have a complete history, because there are people out here with questions. The people left here have questions. So I hope that this is a start for you to continue on, and it's maybe generated a little more excitement for you to get started on thinking about some of those family stories and how they tie in and how this information can be helpful in validating that information. So stay tuned, check me out. I have part 2.2 coming up soon, and in that one we'll be going over marriage records, divorce records, military records, family Bible, family and friends, and you. Thanks. Bye-bye.